Her daughter and son-in-law emptied her bedroom, priced her belongings for a yard sale, and locked away her medication while she was still alive. Linda didn't protest. She made one phone call. 3 days later, their mortgage disappeared, and the house was sold. To her. Now Caroline and Derek are packing boxes, still asking who bought their home. And Linda? She's sipping tea. On the deed they never thought she still owned. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. I was folding laundry in the living room, smoothing out the corners like it owed me something. My hands worked quickly, tight mechanical movements that said more than I wanted to admit. A stack of towels. Derek's jeans. Caroline's blouses with their pointed little collars and faint perfume that somehow still clung to them after the wash. "You should thank us for letting you stay here," Caroline said. Just like that. Not angry, not joking, just flat, like she was reading off a grocery list. I didn't look up. I folded another towel, slower this time, the soft terry cloth suddenly harder to hold. I'd lived here for 7 months, since the hip surgery, since the second fall, since the doctors gently suggested it might be time I not live alone. That phrase, so clinical, so careful, and I had agreed, quietly, proudly, with grace, I thought. "Of course," I said now, keeping my voice even, not brittle. "Thank you for the roof." Derek muttered from the hallway, just loud enough for me to hear. "And the groceries." I turned back to the laundry. The pile felt taller now, heavier. I couldn't feel my fingers. Caroline didn't add anything. She was back on her laptop, typing fast. Derek went upstairs, his footsteps thudding like a teenager's, even though he was nearly 40. The TV flickered in the corner. Some streaming drama I couldn't follow anymore. The plot lines jumped too fast. Everyone was always yelling. I finished folding and left the room without saying another word. Later that night, after the house had settled into its usual clicks and hums, I put on my coat and stepped outside. The air was sharp, colder than I expected, but I didn't go back for gloves. The snow had started again, light but steady. Pinpricks melting on my cheeks. I stood at the edge of the yard, their yard. I hadn't called it home in months. "What you don't know," I whispered into the night, "could buy 10 roofs." It wasn't for them. It was for me. A reminder that I wasn't always this woman in their guest room, that I had stood on my own 2 feet for longer than they'd been alive, that I had paid bills, written checks, juggled numbers and emergencies and a grocery list all in one breath, that I had fed them. God, how I had fed them. I pulled out my phone, my fingers stiff but determined. I found Nina's name and hit call. She answered on the second ring. "Linda." Her voice was warm, startled. "Is everything all right?" "I think they've forgotten," I said. "That I used to feed them. That I held this family together with both hands while their father—" I stopped. I didn't want to go there. Nina was quiet. I could hear her breath, steady, familiar. "They've forgotten what I built," I said, softer now. "Or maybe they never knew." She let a beat pass, then said, "Then maybe it's time to remind them, gently, or otherwise." I laughed a little. It felt brittle in the cold air, but real. "You always were the fire starter," I said. "I just don't like seeing you erased," she replied. "And I won't pretend you weren't the engine behind everything that worked." We talked for a few more minutes, quietly, like the snow might overhear us. I told her about the sentence, the laundry, Derek's mutter. She listened without interrupting, just the way I needed her to. When we hung up, I stayed outside a while longer. The wind moved softly through the trees. Lights from the house glowed through the frost on the windows, making everything look prettier than it felt. Eventually, I went back in, peeled off the coat, hung it on the peg near the door where it didn't really fit. But I made do. The laundry was still on the table, neatly stacked. I moved slowly down the hall to my room, Derek's old room, now stripped of posters and trophies, with a twin bed and a small lamp. I sat down on the edge and looked at the bookshelf. Some of the spines were mine, others were Caroline's. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. I thought about what Nina said. Gently or otherwise, tomorrow maybe I'd start writing again. Not for them, for me. Because what they didn't know wasn't just history, it was power. I woke early the next morning, before the heat kicked on, before the kettle hissed. The house was still. I moved slowly, socked feet against hardwood, careful not to make a sound. This wasn't eavesdropping. It was reconnaissance. Carolyn's world ran on quiet rhythms. She always left her mug beside the sink after her second coffee, never rinsed. Her laptop charger lived plugged into the wall beside the buffet, and she checked the same 3 websites every morning: school email, the PTA app, and Zillow. Always Zillow lately. Derek came down later, half-shaved and restless, clicking through CNN headlines like he might find a different version of his life if he looked fast enough. They never noticed me sitting in the corner chair. They talked freely, as if I were part of the furniture now. Or maybe they just didn't care. That morning, I heard her sigh. Not the heavy, performative kind, but something smaller, defeated. "We're 2 payments behind," she said, screen glow lighting her face. "If they raise the rate again in January..." Derek just grunted, pouring cereal like it was all beyond him now, behind on the mortgage. I stored the words away like a pearl inside my cheek. By mid-morning, Nina had emailed what I'd asked for. The title line read, "You might want to sit down." I opened it at the kitchen table while Caroline was upstairs on a Zoom call. A neatly scanned appraisal summary was attached. My cabin, the one by Mirror Lake I'd kept in my name all these years, had just tripled in value. Market flood from the tech crowd. They were calling it the next Tahoe. I'd almost laughed. Nina added a note beneath it. "You sitting down yet?" I stared out the window. Snow still falling, thick and quiet, the kind that made you want soup and a story. My cabin had both, tucked away in the pine-covered hush of upstate. I clicked open a reply. "Let them think I'm broke a little longer." She wrote back instantly, "You're too kind." I typed, then paused. My fingers hovered over the keys. Then, "No, I'm patient." I closed the laptop slowly and reached for the photo album on the bookshelf. Thick burgundy leather, the spine cracked and familiar. It was the one with Derek's graduation pictures and Caroline's dance recitals, the album nobody touched anymore. I tucked the deed inside, folded carefully in an old-school folder, the paper still crisp. Then I slid it back between baby pictures and summer trips, where no one would think to look. Not because it was hidden, but because no one here looked back unless it served them. The phone buzzed. A group chat from Caroline's PTA board pinged, lighting up the counter. I ignored it. Instead, I boiled water for tea. Chamomile, a reminder to myself that calm is a choice. In the background, Derek clattered down the stairs, grumbling about traffic, though he hadn't had a job to drive to in weeks. Caroline trailed after him in socks and irritation. They said if we can't make February's payment, we'll have to list the house. Her voice was too loud. On purpose. He didn't respond. She added, "Maybe your mom could—" I poured my tea. Silence filled the space between her sentence and the sound of the kettle being set back down. "She's barely covering her meds," Derek said, "and her social's fixed." I sipped slowly. Caroline muttered something I didn't catch. I let the mug warm both hands, still not saying a word. I wasn't here to save them, but I'd be damned if they thought I needed saving. Dinner was baked ziti and bagged salad. Caroline had dusted the top with parmesan like it made things special, but the sauce had that flat, metallic tang, the kind that came from a jar, hurried and bitter. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. We all sat around the table, forks scraping against ceramic, the TV low in the background. Derek ate fast, barely chewing. Caroline had her elbows on the table, a napkin folded too neatly beside her plate. I took small bites. Not from nerves, but from habit. Stillness had become my sharpest blade. She cleared her throat halfway through. That subtle cue she'd used since high school to start the conversation she'd already rehearsed. "So," she said, dabbing at her mouth though it was spotless, "we're putting a few new house rules in place." I looked up slowly, met her eyes without blinking. "All right." She pushed her plate away, as if the performance required more space. "Starting next month, we'll need everyone contributing." "Financially?" Derek didn't look up, just added, "We're carrying enough as it is." Like I was weight. Something being dragged. Caroline continued, too smooth. "We know your checks will be coming in soon, so we figured this gives you a little time to prepare." I set my fork down gently. "Of course. I'll handle my part soon." Not defensive, not sarcastic, just even. Controlled. Caroline nodded, almost relieved by my calm. "Good. We just need adults here to act responsibly. That's all this is." That last line landed in the room like a cracked teacup, still standing, but chipped all the same. I took a sip of water. "You're right." She blinked once, maybe surprised it went so easily, or maybe disappointed. I couldn't tell anymore. Derek stood abruptly, plate in hand, and dumped his leftovers in the sink. The faucet came on. Too loud. Too hot. I helped clear the table, quietly. No resistance. I even rinsed my own dish, placed it carefully in the dishwasher, and wiped down the counter. When Caroline disappeared into the laundry room, I slipped my phone from my pocket. One new message from Nina. "You're collecting receipts." Smart woman. I smiled at that. Because I was. I had watched Caroline switch from almond milk to oat milk in October. Not because of health, but because it was cheaper at the co-op. I'd noticed the extra coupons clipped to the fridge. I'd seen Derek dig quarters from the laundry jar to pay the pizza guy on Sunday night. They were leaking, and I wasn't the hole. I texted Nina back. "Sometimes you let the game play out before you show your hand." She sent back a thumbs up, and then, a moment later, "You keeping everything documented?" I looked toward the burgundy album on the bookshelf. The deed still tucked neatly inside. Insurance, history, leverage. Better than the IRS, I typed. Dinner done, I made myself tea again. This time I added honey. I wanted the taste of something earned. Caroline walked through on her phone, whispering fast to someone. No, she didn't push back at all. I was surprised, actually. Right, well, one less thing to worry about. I stirred my tea slowly and didn't flinch. Let her talk. They thought I was folded, settled, tamed. But the thing about folding, it creates creases. lines that hold shape, edges that cut if you press too hard. I drank my tea slowly and planned. I told Caroline I needed to clear out some old boxes at the cabin, papers, tax records, maybe a few photo albums. She barely looked up from her phone. "Just text when you're back," she said, like I was an errand running itself. The roads were clear enough by noon. I packed light, a thermos of coffee, my file folders, and the keys I'd never surrendered. Snow lined the shoulders of the highway, but the asphalt was dry and the silence in the car was a welcome one. No clinking dishes, no forced conversations. The cabin sat where I left it, tucked into the tree line with its green trim and wraparound porch still intact. There was something holy about how untouched it looked, like time hadn't dared come here without permission. I stood on the porch for a full minute before unlocking the door. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and old stories. I stepped into it the way you step into memory, carefully, fully. The walls still held the warmth of wood and old laughter. The fireplace stood cold but proud, the mantel undisturbed. No shouting voices, no tight schedules, no one asking what I contribute. I ran my hand along the back of the armchair, my chair, next to the big bay window that overlooked the lake. The water was frozen now, but in spring it would thaw fast and clean. The loons would come back, and the wind would carry their call. I could have wept. But instead, I breathed, long and deep. My real home. Not borrowed, not judged. Mine. A knock at the door broke the stillness, but not harshly. I opened it to find Nina bundled in a slate gray coat and leather gloves, smiling like she knew exactly what I was thinking. "Still beautiful," she said, stepping inside. "More than they'll ever appreciate," I replied. She set her bag on the kitchen table and pulled out the paperwork. Slim manila folders. One for the trust update, one for the deed transfer, one for her copy. I didn't need to read the details, I'd reviewed them twice already, but I signed anyway, hand steady. "This means it'll bypass probate entirely," Nina said, checking the notary lines. "Fully protected." "And fully mine, on paper, and otherwise," I said. She nodded. "If they push again." "I'll push back," I said, sliding the folder closed, with paperwork. We stood in silence for a moment, the kind between old friends who've weathered storms without naming them. "You always preferred quiet wars," she said finally, half smiling. "I was never built for brawls," I said. "But I know how to wait. And I know how to win." We made tea in the old enamel kettle, chipped but still humming when it boiled. Sat by the cold hearth like two women who'd seen a lot and kept more. I told her about the dinner, the new rules, Derek's silence, Caroline's pre-rehearsed tone. Nina shook her head, but not in surprise. "They think they're protecting their house," I said, "but they don't realize I already left it." Nina looked out toward the lake, the trees like guardians surrounding the cabin. "You coming back here for good?" "Not yet," I said. "Let the ground thaw first. Let them play out the rest of their season." She nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. By afternoon, she was back on the road. I stayed a little longer. Went through the boxes just enough to make the story look true. Shuffled receipts. Moved a few books around. But mostly I just sat. Listened to the wood settle. Let the silence remind me of who I was before I bent myself to fit someone else's version of generosity. I'd give them what they wanted, until it was time to show them what I had. It was oatmeal again for breakfast. Gummy. Overcooked. Derek added too much cinnamon and not enough salt. But no one said anything. The house had gone quiet lately. In that particular way, things go quiet when the foundation is shifting, and everyone's pretending not to notice the tilt. Caroline was already at the counter, scrolling through her phone like she was mining it for solutions. I could see the pinched look in her forehead, the one that showed up whenever a PTA email included the phrase, donation deadline. Derek sat across from me, elbows on the table, bowl untouched. Then he said it. Casual, but too even to be careless. We might have to sell this house? He didn't look at Caroline when he said it. Just stared down at the steam rising from his oatmeal like he didn't want to be responsible for how it landed. Caroline blinked once, then twice. Excuse me? I said we might have to list it. I talked to the lender again. Things aren't moving, and that rate adjustment's coming. We're 2 payments from serious trouble. No one's buying in this market, she snapped. Her voice rose, thin with panic. He didn't flinch, just shrugged like he'd rehearsed that too. Some people are. She laughed, short, brittle. Who? The billionaires bidding on waterfront property? We're not exactly in a hot zip code. I stirred my tea gently, one long circle. Let the spoon ring once against the side of the mug. Then I set it down. The truth sat warm in my chest, steady and silent. Someone had made an offer. An all-cash one, no contingencies, over asking. Sent through a holding trust with no name attached. Submitted yesterday morning while they were still asleep. And it came from me. Nina handled it all, clean, professional, legally bulletproof. She filed the paperwork through the trust I'd just transferred the cabin into. The LLC name was forgettable on purpose. A shell company owned by the trust. The trust owned by me. I didn't even have to sign the purchase offer myself. It felt like leaving a note inside a locked room and walking away with the key. 2 days ago, when we'd finalized the paperwork at the cabin, Nina had looked at me across the kitchen table and asked, "You sure you want to go this far?" And I said, "I'm not going far. I'm coming back to center." Now, across from me, Derek sighed and rubbed at his eyes. Look, it's not ideal, but the bank's not bluffing. We list. Or they start proceedings. Caroline sat down slowly. We can't move. Not now. Nora's school. She'll adapt, Derek cut in. She's 10. We moved at her age. Caroline looked like she wanted to argue but couldn't find a foothold. I lifted my mug to my lips and took a quiet sip. She turned to me then, like it had just occurred to her I was sitting at the same table. Do you have thoughts about this? I met her eyes calmly. If it's what you need to do, then I'm sure it's the right decision. She tilted her head, watching me closely. You're surprisingly relaxed about it. I've moved before, I said. I know how to land on my feet. Neither of them replied. Upstairs, Nora's bedroom door creaked open, her morning shuffle moving toward the bathroom. I'm late for a Zoom, Caroline muttered, rising and grabbing her phone. She left her oatmeal half-eaten on the counter, the spoon sliding into the bowl with a soft clink. Derek lingered a moment longer, then followed her out of the kitchen without another word. When the room cleared, I pulled out my phone. One new message from Nina. Offer confirmed. Title company will handle the rest. They won't trace it. Another followed a moment later. They'll be stunned how fast it closes. I typed back. Just let it move quietly. I don't want noise. She replied with a single word. Handled. I looked out the window at the snow settling in soft layers along the fence. The sky was that winter gray that made everything look older, quieter. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt precise. This wasn't a win. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something clean. They thought they were being forced to sell. They didn't know they were selling it to me. It started small. "You don't need to cook, Mom," Caroline said one morning as I moved toward the fridge. "I already planned the week's meals." Her voice was light, almost chipper, like she was doing me a favor. I stepped back. Of course. The word tasted thin. The next day, my tea canister disappeared from the cupboard. Then the kettle, replaced by an electric one with too many buttons and no soul. I said nothing. Caroline had always preferred gadgets over tradition, something she inherited from her father's side, I used to joke. By Thursday, the towels I folded had been refolded. My slippers moved from the hall rack to the top of the laundry shelf, too high to reach without the step stool they'd hidden. I wasn't imagining it. I hadn't imagined the locked cabinet under the sink either, where my prescription bottles used to be. Or the fact that my address had been removed from the joint Costco account. They called it organizing. I called it erasure. Still, I played the role they gave me. I smiled, kept to my room, and nodded when Caroline suggested I just enjoy this chapter, as if quiet confinement was a reward. Late Friday afternoon, while looking for an old sweater I knew I hadn't moved, I opened Derek's drawer by mistake. Or maybe not by mistake. There, tucked between a pile of mismatched socks and an unused tie, was the watch. My husband's watch. Black leather strap, gold trim. The little nick at the 8 from when it slipped off the night we danced in the kitchen too fast, too young. I'd tucked it away after his funeral, wrapped in one of his handkerchiefs. I hadn't seen it in years. I touched it gently, then closed the drawer. "I see," I whispered. I didn't mention it. Not to Derek, not to Caroline, not even to Nina. Some things speak louder when left unsaid. That night, after dinner, I sat on the edge of my bed and let the silence settle around me like a second skin. I wasn't tired, but the weight of everything sat heavy in my chest. Not grief, exactly. Not anger. More like the slow ache of being slowly undone. My eyes stung before I even noticed the tears. I didn't sob. I just let it happen. And then I heard the knock, barely a tap, before Anna peeked her head in. She was holding a flashlight and a library book, her eyes wide and thoughtful. She looked at me like kids do when they sense something adults have stopped acknowledging. "Grandma?" I wiped my cheek quickly. "Sorry, sweetheart. You caught me during a weather report." She walked in slowly, climbed up next to me without asking. "It's okay," she said softly. "They don't see you right." I didn't trust my voice just yet, so I nodded. She laid her head on my shoulder. "Mom says you're old now, but I think you're just..." Paused. That made me laugh, quiet, through my nose. "Paused, huh?" "Yeah, like when you stop a movie but it's still there, just waiting." I turned to look at her. She meant it, completely. I kissed her hair. "Then I'll make them look," I said, almost to myself. Anna smiled like she knew what I meant. And maybe she did. The house smelled like lemon-scented cleaner and forced charm. Caroline had gone all out for the neighborhood dinner. Nothing too big. Just 6 adults from the block. The ones who still pretended these events were spontaneous. There were cloth napkins on the table, candles that had clearly never been lit before, and a playlist of instrumental jazz humming from her Bluetooth speaker in the corner. I watched from the kitchen doorway as Caroline arranged the charcuterie board like it mattered. She'd swapped her sweatshirt for a soft pink blouse and had done that thing with her hair where it curled under slightly at the shoulders, like she wanted to look both maternal and polished. Derek had a glass of wine in hand before the first guest walked in. The conversation started with property taxes, moved on to kids' extracurriculars, then finally landed, right on cue, on me. Carolyn smiled with just enough humility to look generous. "We're helping Mom get back on her feet," she said, passing around a tray of crostini. I smiled politely, chewed slowly, swallowed. "She's had a tough year," she continued. "The surgery, the fall. It just made sense to bring her here for a while." Derek chimed in, not looking at me. "She's lucky we took her in when we did. Would have been hard to manage that house on her own." Someone murmured something about family stepping up, but the comment trailed off like a balloon losing air. I nodded, just as I was supposed to, said nothing. The woman across from me, Karen, or maybe Sharon, gave a tight smile like she didn't know which expression would be most appropriate. Sympathy? Admiration? Pity? I gave her none of mine in return. The rest of the meal passed in a haze of polite interruptions and thin compliments. The food was under-seasoned, but that didn't stop anyone from clearing their plates. Caroline beamed at every emptied dish like it confirmed her role in the world. After dessert, she turned to me with performative cheer. "Why don't you relax, Mom? We'll clean up." "I'd rather keep busy," I said quietly, collecting plates. She didn't argue, not in front of the guests. In the kitchen, I filled the sink with hot water and watched it steam against the cold window. I scrubbed each plate carefully, not because they needed it, but because I did. Behind me, their words played again on a loop. "She's lucky we took her in." "Helping Mom get back on her feet." Like I was a burden, a project, a slow-motion charity case being staged in public. I washed the wine glasses last, the delicate ones with thin stems Caroline only brought out for these kinds of nights. I held one up to the light and turned it slowly. No cracks. Not yet. The room had emptied. Guests gone, leftovers boxed. Caroline was upstairs helping Nora brush her teeth. Derek's voice floated faintly from the den, the TV low, some crime show he'd pretend to follow. I dried my hands, folded the dish towel, and took a long breath. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Nina. I stepped out onto the back porch before answering. The cold hit fast, but it felt like oxygen. "You good?" she asked, no preamble. I nodded before remembering she couldn't see me. "I'm good. I heard from escrow. Everything's tracking. Title clears by the 15th. We can accelerate if needed." "No. Let it land on time. Not too early. Not too late." "You sure?" I looked through the window, saw the flicker of the dining room candles still burning low. Caroline had left them on, maybe thinking the glow made the room feel warmer than it was. "I'm sure." Nina paused. Then, "You ready to turn the lights on?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched the frost creeping along the edge of the window pane, slow and certain, reshaping what was underneath without breaking the glass. Then I smiled. Just a little. "They've been on," I said. "They just weren't looking." I'd been up since 4:30. The kitchen was dark when I entered, just the blue hum of the fridge and the distant tick of the thermostat cycling on. I didn't bother with lights. I moved by feel now. This house had become familiar in the way a cage eventually teaches you its corners. The envelope was already sealed. I'd signed everything the night before. Clean signature, steady hand, no hesitation. Inside was the full certified payment, enough to buy out the mortgage, the late fees, the escrow balance. It was quiet power, zipped into a manila sleeve and addressed to a bank manager who would never know my name. Nina had double-checked everything, then checked again. "It'll clear in 2 business days," she told me over the phone. "By then, it's yours. Not in theory, not in trust. Yours." She'd also overnighted the transfer documents, moving all assets from the holding trust directly into my name. The cabin, the investment account, the LLC holding the house purchase. Everything that had been layered and quiet was now consolidated, visible. I wasn't hiding anymore. All legal, Nina had confirmed, all airtight. She didn't ask if I wanted to change my mind. She knew me better than that. I pulled on my coat and stepped outside, envelope in hand. The air had that sharp, pre-snow stillness. Not a single car moved on the street. Even the wind was holding its breath. At the end of the driveway, I opened the mailbox and slid the envelope in slowly. Let it rest there a moment, like a gesture at an altar. Then I closed the lid. It was done. Back inside, I started breakfast. Not for myself, but for all of them. 2 eggs per person, scrambled low and slow. Toast with real butter, not the plant-based spread Caroline insisted on. I warmed up the skillet, brewed fresh coffee, even cut fruit the way Nora liked. Apples with the skin on, bananas in coins. It was the kind of breakfast I used to make when the house was mine, before everything got louder and faster and too complicated to explain. I moved through the kitchen calmly, not rushed, not timid, like someone who belonged. "Mom?" Caroline's voice came from the stairs. She sounded half awake, surprised. I turned and saw her standing in the doorway, robe cinched, hair still in sleep-set waves. "You're up early," she said. "I am," I replied, smiling gently. "Big day ahead." She blinked at that. "What's happening today?" "Oh," I said lightly, flipping a pancake now. "You'll see." She stood there a second longer, then nodded slowly, as if trying to decide if she should be suspicious. But the smell of eggs must have won. She mumbled something about coffee and shuffled back upstairs. I plated everything just as Derek came down, yawning into his shoulder. "Smells good," he said halfway into a stretch. "Eat while it's hot," I told him. He didn't question it, just sat and started loading up a plate like it was a normal morning, like we hadn't spent months tiptoeing around each other. By the time Caroline reappeared, dressed and slightly more polished, the kitchen looked like something from a brochure. Derek was halfway through his second piece of toast. The good plates were out. The butter dish gleamed. She paused again. "Did something happen?" I shook my head. "Not yet." That answer seemed to settle into the room like a change in air pressure. No one asked more. I poured myself coffee last and sat at the head of the table. Not dramatically, not pointedly, just naturally, like it made sense again. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Nina. "USPS confirms delivery scan. They have it." Another followed seconds later. "Let me know when to start the clock." I stared at the screen for a long moment before tucking the phone away. No reply yet. Let them eat. Let the food do what food does. Soothe, distract, disarm. Let them believe in the calm just long enough. Because storms don't warn you with thunder. They arrive in silence. And this one was already in motion. The call came just after lunch. Caroline was at the kitchen island, half distracted. Scrolling through her email while stirring a pot of soup she wasn't really watching. I was sitting at the table, cutting coupons from the Sunday insert, not because I needed to, but because it gave me something to do with my hands. The phone rang, sharp, insistent. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned. "It's the bank," she said to Derek, who was on the couch pretending to read the paper. Probably another reminder. He didn't even look up. Ignore it. But she didn't. She answered because that's who she was. Someone who thought problems disappeared if she looked polite enough. "Hello?" "Yes, this is she." A pause. Her eyebrows pinched together. What do you mean, purchased? I didn't move, just kept clipping quietly. Yes, I understand, she said, voice tightening. But purchased by who? Another pause. Then louder. No. No one informed us of any sale. There must be a mistake. She hung up slowly, the phone still hovering in her hand. Derek looked up now. What's wrong? Caroline swallowed hard. They said, our loan's been bought, transferred to a private party. Derek blinked. What? Why? Who would do that? They wouldn't tell me, she said, her voice breaking a little. Just said all future correspondence would come from the new owner. I took a sip of my tea, calm as ever. Banks change hands every day, I murmured. It's probably just one of those investment groups. Nothing personal. Caroline looked at me then, searching, like she thought maybe I knew more than I should. That's strange though, right? Strange, I agreed, but not uncommon. She nodded slowly, still staring at the phone like it might ring again and explain itself. Derek stood up and started pacing. We should call them back, demand details. Caroline didn't answer. Her face had gone pale. I reached for another coupon. The scissors whispered against the page. By dinner, she was still rattled. Derek kept checking his email as if the truth might arrive between advertisements for car insurance and clearance tools. No one said the word foreclosure, but it sat there, fat, unspoken, at the center of the table. I served myself quietly, ate, washed my plate, went to my room. When the mail arrived later that evening, it came with the usual stack of catalogs and bills, but tucked between them was one heavy envelope, legal size, embossed with the title company's seal. I closed my door before opening it. The papers slid out smoothly. The deed. Official, notarized, complete. Title reassignment to Mirror Bay Holdings, LLC, beneficiary, the Linda Marin Trust. I ran my thumb along the edge of the document. The embossed stamp caught the lamplight. Everything had cleared. The house, their house, was mine. I placed the papers neatly on the desk, sat back, and exhaled for the first time all day. I thought of that morning's breakfast, the casual laughter, the smell of coffee. How Caroline had looked at me like I was a harmless fixture, a background detail in her own story. Not anymore. My phone buzzed. A text from Nina. They'll connect the dots soon. You ready for that? I stared at the message for a moment, the corners of my mouth softening. Then I typed back, good. Class is in session. She sent back a single check mark, her version of a salute. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my room. The same four walls, same muted paint, same modest furniture Caroline had claimed was temporary until we redecorate. It didn't feel small tonight. It felt earned. I opened the drawer where I'd once kept my husband's watch. It gleamed faintly in the light, restored to its rightful place, ticking quietly. I wound it once, out of habit. The steady rhythm filled the silence. Outside, the snow began again, thin flakes spinning under the porch light. The house creaked the way old houses do when they settle, unaware their ownership has changed hands. Downstairs, I heard Caroline's voice, tense, brittle. I'm going to call the bank again tomorrow. There has to be a mistake. Derek mumbled something back, too low to catch. I smiled faintly, folded the deed back into its envelope, and placed it in the drawer beside the watch. Let them chase the storm. It had already passed through. They didn't knock. Caroline burst into my room like she'd been holding her breath all night and had just found the air to yell. Did you buy our mortgage? Her voice cracked on the last word. equal parts disbelief and fury. Behind her, Derek hovered like a shadow, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't look at me. He looked through me, like he was trying to process something too big to say out loud. I stood by the dresser, folding a sweater, deliberate and slow. A light blue one Caroline had given me for Christmas 2 years ago, tags still on. She liked to give things that looked good in pictures. I didn't flinch. Technically, I said, smoothing the sleeves, my trust did. Caroline blinked like she hadn't actually expected me to confirm it. Are you kidding me? No. Derek stepped forward. That's manipulation. That's control. No, I said, turning to face them fully now, voice even. That's called financial literacy. Caroline's mouth opened, then closed again. The silence between us grew sharp. She looked betrayed, but not surprised. I think she'd known since yesterday. She just hadn't wanted to believe it. You tricked us, she said finally. Her voice dropped to something colder now. You let us think we were in charge, all that time. I let you think a lot of things, I said. That's on me. Derek stepped forward, but not enough to challenge, just to show presence. What do you even want from us? Some kind of apology? Gratitude? I tilted my head. Neither. I already got what I needed. You bought the house out from under your own daughter. No, I said again. I rescued an asset that was about to drown because two grown adults refused to check the water level. I gave this house a future. You're welcome. Caroline shook her head, arms folded tightly across her chest like she was trying to keep herself from falling apart. You blindsided us. You cornered me, I said simply. This was me turning around. I can't believe you'd go this far, she whispered. I nodded. And yet, here we are. She looked like she wanted to cry, not from heartbreak, but from embarrassment, from loss of image. This wasn't how she'd planned to be seen. You were always smarter than you let on, Derek muttered. I know. The room fell quiet again. You could hear the old radiator click from the hallway, Nora's footsteps somewhere above us, the hum of a life still moving forward, even as theirs felt like it had stopped. I took the folded sweater and placed it into the drawer. Then, softly, you taught me how to do this. Caroline looked confused. How to act like everything's fine. How to keep my voice low, my chin up, my anger folded small enough to hide in a napkin. How to smile in front of guests while you made decisions behind closed doors. You trained me well. That's not fair. No, I said, but it's accurate. She stepped back like the words had weight. Derek had nothing left to add. He just looked at the floor. I picked up my mug of tea and took a sip, still warm, still calming. Then I stepped around them and walked out of the room. Not fast, not loud, just steady. They didn't follow. In the hallway, I passed the picture frames they'd rehung after repainting last summer. Photos from family vacations where everyone had practiced smiles. The one of me and my late husband at Lake George, our last real trip before he got sick, had been moved to the lowest shelf. I straightened it as I passed. Back in the kitchen, I opened the window just enough to let the cold in. The kind that clears your head. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Nina. All files delivered. New title registration logged. Bank records updated, clock started. Then, just below it, you okay? I looked out at the yard. The snow had stopped, but the sky was still a dull white, soft and honest. I typed back, I'm not waiting for them to understand anymore. And just below that, time to reintroduce myself. The silence stretched across the house like a film no one wanted to peel back. Caroline didn't come downstairs for 2 full days. Her door stayed shut, locked from the inside. Trays of food sat outside, barely touched. Nora knocked once or twice, then gave up. Even Derek stopped trying to coax her out after the first morning. He'd muttered something about needing space and disappeared into the garage with a six-pack by noon. By the third day, the silence had teeth. You could hear everything: the heater kicking on, the fridge humming, the creak of floorboards under my slippers. Every sound felt like it didn't belong. The house had gone hollow at the center. Except for Anna. She started trailing me like a shadow, quiet but curious. Coloring books in hand, socks always mismatched, eyes scanning everything like she was trying to read between lines. No one was brave enough to say aloud. She didn't ask questions at first. She just started sitting at the kitchen table when I did, helping with dishes when no one asked her to. Her presence was soft, steady. A balm against the ache her parents couldn't name. It was late afternoon when she finally asked. We were peeling apples for a crumble. Her idea, not mine. She liked the peeler, said it felt like magic the way the skin curled off in perfect spirals. "Grandma," she said softly, not looking up, "do you hate them?" I set my apple down, took a breath. "No, darling," I said. "Hate's heavy. I prefer gravity." She frowned a little. "What does that mean?" "Gravity always pulls lessons down," I said. "It makes sure nothing stays weightless forever." She looked at me for a long time, then nodded like she understood, even if she didn't quite yet. Like a consequence? Exactly. Later that night, she curled up next to me on the couch and fell asleep during the first 10 minutes of a movie we never finished. Her head against my shoulder, her breath slow and even. Derek was still in the garage. Caroline's door remained closed. The house no longer felt like theirs. It felt like borrowed time. The next morning, I packed a small overnight bag, a change of clothes, some groceries, a few puzzles Anna liked. She stood by the door with her backpack. No questions, no resistance. "Where are we going?" she asked as I zipped my coat. "Somewhere quiet," I said. The drive to the cabin was hushed, snow curling off the shoulders of the road like ribbon. Anna watched the trees pass, her finger drawing invisible shapes on the window. When we arrived, she gasped. Not loudly, just in awe. "It looks like a painting." I smiled. "It feels like one, too." Inside, everything was just as I'd left it. Logs stacked near the fireplace, tea towels folded neatly, the air smelling faintly of cedar and thyme. I lit a fire while she explored every room, running her hand along the railing like it might tell her stories. Later, we walked down to the lake, boots crunching softly over the frost-hardened path. The shoreline had thawed just enough to reflect the sky, blue-gray and open. We stood there a long while, saying nothing, just listening. Then I knelt beside her, pointed toward the water. "Someday," I whispered, "this will be yours." Her eyes widened. "Mine?" I nodded. "It's already waiting." She didn't say anything, but she leaned into me, small and warm and sure. And in that moment, the grief I hadn't named, the grief of having raised children who forgot how to see me, shifted. Not disappeared, but softened. Because this one saw me. And someday, she'd remember that I saw her too. I returned to the house 3 days later. Anna had fallen asleep in the back seat, one hand still clutching the pine cone she'd found by the cabin steps. I carried her inside gently and tucked her into her bed without waking her. The house was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. It had that charged stillness, the kind you feel before a door slams or something breaks. When I stepped into my room, I noticed immediately. The bookshelf was half empty. The framed photo of my wedding day. Gone. My sewing kit. Missing. The wool coat I'd worn every fall for 20 years. Nowhere to be found. I checked the hall closet, then the garage. That's when I saw the folding table, set up like a sad little yard sale. My things stacked in bins and plastic tubs. Price tags on some of them. A handwritten sign taped to a cardboard box. Estate clearance. Cash only. I stared at it for a long time, not angry, not surprised, just sad. Caroline had always had a talent for declaring something obsolete the moment it no longer fit her aesthetic. I returned to the kitchen and made tea. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Nina didn't bother with pleasantries when I picked up. "She tried to sell your personal property," she said. I intercepted the Craigslist post and had the paralegal send over a cease and desist with the trust's terms attached. I stirred the honey into my mug, calm and slow. "Good. You're fully protected," she continued. "Every asset inside the house, including your room, your furniture, your recorded heirlooms, is explicitly tied to your trust. She can't touch a thing without triggering legal action." Another pause, then gently, "I'm sorry it came to this." "It always was this," I said. "They just thought I wouldn't draw the line." The shouting started 20 minutes later. Derek's voice came first, louder than I'd heard in months. "We can't live like this." I was in the living room, sitting on the couch with my tea. I didn't move. "You can't just drop rules like bombs and walk away," he yelled. "You don't get to play puppet master." Caroline's voice followed, higher, ragged. "You embarrassed us. You humiliated me in front of the bank, the neighbors, our daughter." I didn't raise my voice. "You embarrassed yourselves," I said plainly. "I just made it official." Derek stormed into the living room. His face was red, hands clenched. "You really think this is normal?" he snapped. "Suing your own family in spirit if not on paper?" "No one's suing anyone," I said. "I protected what was mine. That's what responsible adults do." "You weaponized money." "No," I replied. "You just never expected me to understand it better than you." That stopped him. Just for a second. Then Caroline appeared in the doorway, eyes glassy, shoulders hunched like something inside her had collapsed. She looked smaller than I remembered. "You embarrassed us," she repeated, this time barely audible. I looked at her gently. "No," I said. "I educated you." She flinched. It wasn't the words. It was the truth inside them, sharp and impossible to ignore. The room went quiet. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the distant murmur of Nora's tablet upstairs. "I spent a lifetime giving," I said. "And I didn't ask for interest. But the moment I needed room to breathe, you treated me like a burden." Neither of them spoke. "You didn't need help," I said. "You needed accountability, and now you have it." Caroline covered her face with her hands. Derek sat down hard on the edge of the armchair, like he suddenly couldn't trust his own knees. I stood slowly, set my empty mug in the sink, and turned toward the window. Outside, dusk had started to spread. That soft, bruised lavender sky. The kind that doesn't announce itself but still changes everything. I didn't say another word. Some lessons don't need repeating. The morning light came soft and golden through the dining room curtains, the kind that made everything look deceptively calm. But nothing about this day was calm. Nina sat across from me, a stack of documents neatly fanned across the table. Her fountain pen lay beside my teacup, gleaming against the china. "Once you sign these," she said gently, "it's final." I looked down at the first page, the official transfer to the Mirror Lake Women's Recovery Foundation, My cabin, my land, my sanctuary, all of it, now gifted in perpetuity. The ink would make it real. It's time, I said. Nina nodded once. It's a beautiful thing, Linda. You're giving something that will outlast you. That's the point, I said. It was never meant to die in storage. I signed every line carefully, no tremor in the hand. When it was done, she gathered the papers, stacked them perfectly, and let out a long breath. Ready? She asked. As I'll ever be. The meeting at the attorney's office was scheduled for 11, the same conference room where we'd first gone over my husband's estate years ago. Funny how full circles never look the way you expect them to. Caroline and Derek arrived 10 minutes late. They didn't sit together. Derek wore the same suit he'd worn to Nora's recital. Carolyn looked pale, pulled in at the edges. They didn't greet me. The attorney, a man named Halpern who spoke like every word was pre-approved by God, cleared his throat and began. As executor of the Marin Trust, I'm here to confirm recent updates to the asset distribution, effective immediately. He glanced at me, then at the envelope in front of him. The lakeside property has been transferred, as of this morning, to the Mirror Lake Women's Recovery Foundation, to be converted into transitional housing for survivors of domestic and financial abuse. Caroline blinked. Wait, what? Halpern continued. All proceeds and maintenance responsibilities will be managed by the foundation. The trust will oversee endowment funds for the first 5 years. Caroline turned toward me, her eyes wide, voice thin. You gave it all away? I met her gaze calmly. I gave it where it would grow. Derek let out a small, humorless laugh. Unbelievable. You're just... what? Punishing us? I said nothing. Nina, sitting quietly beside me, set down her notebook. Linda also left something for both of you, she said. Separate letters. Halpern slid 2 envelopes across the table. Caroline's hands shook as she opened hers. Derek didn't bother. He pushed his toward her like he didn't need another sermon. Caroline unfolded the page. Her lips moved as she read, silently at first, then audibly, barely more than a whisper. You're free to start over, this time on your own merit. The room went still. Even the air seemed to pause. Her fingers tightened around the paper. Her breath hitched once, twice, then broke entirely. You think this is kindness? She said, voice trembling. You think this lesson makes you noble? I looked at her steadily. I think it makes me honest. Derek stood abruptly, chair scraping hard against the floor. I'm done, he said. You win, Mom. Whatever game this was, congratulations. He grabbed his coat and stormed out, the door slamming so hard it rattled the blinds. Caroline stayed frozen in her seat, shoulders heaving. I waited. Let the silence find its shape. Finally, I reached into my purse, pulled out a folded photograph, the one of her at 5 years old, missing a front tooth, laughing with a popsicle dripping down her chin. I slid it across the table toward her. I loved you then, I said softly. And I still do. But love without lessons isn't love, it's permission. Tears fell fast now, spilling over the edge of her composure. She pressed the photo to her chest like it might stop the shaking. Nina gathered the documents, quiet, efficient. The lawyer excused himself. The sound of his shoes on tile faded down the hall until there was only the soft hum of the fluorescent light above. Caroline finally whispered, What do I even do now? I reached for my tea, still warm from the thermos I'd brought. You start over, I said, the same way I did. When we left the office, the sky was the color of steel. Snow flurries drifted lazily across the windshield. I caught a glimpse of our reflections in the glass door as it swung shut behind us. Me steady, Nina beside me, Caroline a few steps back. Unreadable. For the first time in years, I didn't feel smaller in their world. I had built my own. It was early spring when Caroline made the drive. The roads had thawed, the trees were beginning to shake off winter, and the lake no longer looked like a sheet of glass but something alive again. She didn't tell anyone she was coming. Not Derek. Not even Anna. I found out later through Nina. She parked far from the entrance, Nina told me over tea, like she didn't want to be seen walking in. I could picture it perfectly. Caroline in a tailored coat, holding her purse like a shield, stepping carefully around puddles on the gravel path like she didn't quite belong on the ground beneath her. The cabin didn't look like it used to. It wasn't just the fresh paint or the new wheelchair ramp or the hand-built planters framing the porch with early daffodils blooming despite the frost. It was something in the air. Movement. Music. Life. There were voices inside now. Laughter. Stories that didn't begin with grief, but didn't run from it either. She walked up the steps slowly, not with the old sense of entitlement she used to carry into every room, but something smaller, hesitant, listening. Inside, the main room had been converted into a common space, sunlight on hardwood, warm lamps, baskets of clean blankets, shelves of gently used books. A fire burned low in the hearth. Two women sat nearby, talking quietly over mugs of something hot. Then she saw it, near the window, framed in a simple bronze, a plaque no larger than a sheet of paper. The Linda Marin House. Let stillness teach what noise never could. Beneath it, a smaller inscription, for the women who rebuild, for the girls who rise. Nina had chosen the words. Caroline stared at it for a long time. She didn't cry, Nina told me later. She didn't make a scene. She just stood there. I think she was finally still. Out back, near the porch steps, Anna was sorting through supply bins, gently placing toothbrushes, socks, and handwritten notes into care packages. She volunteered every Tuesday and Thursday after school. She'd started asking the women questions about their stories, but only when invited. She never mentioned her grandmother's name. She let the work speak instead. When Caroline spotted her, she didn't interrupt. Just watched her daughter in silence for a few minutes. Watched the way she moved with care, not guilt, like she belonged there. She's different here, Caroline said quietly to Nina when they finally spoke. She's growing in good soil, Nina replied. There was no accusation in her tone, just truth. Caroline looked back toward the cabin. The windows reflected the lake in the distance. She never stopped teaching us, she said. No, Nina agreed. And she didn't have to shout to be heard. They stood there together for a while. Two women, shoulder to shoulder. One learning how to soften, the other watching it happen. Before she left, Caroline reached into her bag and pulled out a small bouquet, white tulips and wild violets, wrapped in brown paper. No tag, no speech. She placed them on the porch steps, just below the plaque, and stepped back. I don't know if she'll ever want to see me again, she said. She already does, Nina said. You just have to come honestly. Caroline nodded. That was all. She didn't stay long, just enough. Back at home, I received the photo Nina took. Just a snapshot of the bouquet beneath the plaque, with the lake in the distance and the clouds breaking above. I stared at it a long time, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, but with a quiet knowing that some things heal from the root, not the surface. The cottage was quiet when I woke. Not empty, never that, but quiet in the way only peace can be, full of breath, full of light. I didn't rush to sit up. I stayed beneath the warm quilt, watching the sunlight shift across the ceiling, then down the far wall. The lake outside my window was still, except for a slow ripple in the middle where a bird skimmed low. It was spring, but the water still held winter's memory. I stretched slowly, then reached for my mug, placed on the side table the night before, now just warm enough to finish. The cottage wasn't large, but it was enough. One bedroom, a sitting area, a wood stove, and a porch with 2 chairs that faced the lake. The linens were fresh, the cabinets stocked, and the silence mine. That mattered more than anything else. No one pacing the halls, no one watching over my shoulder, no invisible ledger measuring my worth in daily chores and deference. Just stillness, and me inside it. I rose and opened the window. The air smelled of thawed earth, pine, and the wood smoke drifting from the main lodge. Laughter floated faintly up from the hill, where 2 women were stringing laundry lines between trees. One of them waved when she saw me. I waved back. This wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a place with roots. A knock came at the door, quick and familiar. "Come in," I called, already smiling. Anna poked her head in, balancing a tray with practiced care. "I brought breakfast." She walked in proudly, setting the tray on the little table by the window. Toast with jam, a hard-boiled egg, fresh strawberries in a ceramic bowl she'd picked from the donations cabinet last week. "You're spoiling me," I said. "I work here now, remember?" she said, plopping into the armchair with her crooked ponytail and oversized volunteer badge. "And everyone says you're famous." I raised an eyebrow. "Famous?" "They're calling this the Marin model," she grinned. "It's in a blog and a podcast, and Ms. Dina from the shelter said 3 new grant people came just to look around." I laughed, soft and full. "Well, that's something?" Anna leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Grandma?" "Yes, baby. Do you feel proud?" I looked out the window for a long moment before answering. The lake sparkled just enough to make me squint. "I don't feel proud," I said. "I feel home." She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. My phone buzzed on the table, a number I knew, but hadn't seen in weeks. "Caroline." Anna stood. "I'll give you privacy." "No need," I said gently, but she slipped out anyway. I answered on the 3rd ring. Caroline's voice was smaller than I remembered, but clearer somehow. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, Caroline." "I saw the article." A breath. "I heard from the shelter director, too. She said, they have a wait list now, and no turnover. That's rare. It's good news. I wanted to say thank you. For everything. For not giving up." I sat down slowly, letting the silence stretch. Not to make her uncomfortable, just to let the words find their place. "You're welcome," I said softly. Truly, this time. She didn't speak again. Not right away. But her breathing was steady, present, honest. "I'd like to bring Anna this weekend," she said at last. "If that's all right." "It is." Another pause, this one gentler. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll see you then." When I ended the call, I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I simply sat for a while and listened to the wind through the pine outside my window. The lake carried its own kind of music. Later, I stepped out onto the porch, barefoot despite the chill. The wood was warm from the sun. I looked down at the cabin below, the roof now painted white, solar panels gleaming, wind chimes at the eaves dancing in quiet song. They once said I should thank them for letting me stay. Now, they thank me for giving them somewhere to begin again.